The universe we knew ended in a whisper, not a bang. It began with a harmony that bloomed on the edge of the Perseus arm, a signal so pure and mathematically perfect that at first, our astronomers mistook it for a foundational resonance of space-time itself, a background hum of creation we had simply failed to notice until now. Dr. Eris Thorne heard it not with his ears, but as a subtle easing of the tension in his own mind while he worked within the silent vaults of Mnemosyne. The planetoid, a curated jewel box of galactic memory, was his life's work. Here, humanity and a dozen younger races stored their chronicles, their art, their foundational philosophies, and, most importantly, their mistakes. Eris was an archivist of failed species, a curator of extinctions, and he believed fervently that memory was the only true bulwark against the repeating follies of sentient life. He was a small, quiet man, with hands stained by the dust of digitized empires and eyes that seemed to see the ghosts of dead stars. He often felt more at home with the dead than the living. His own species, humanity, was a source of constant, wearying fascination. They were so loud, so brilliantly, catastrophically chaotic. A species that wrote poetry with one hand while sharpening a blade with the other. He loved them for it, and he feared them for it, and he was glad to be half a galaxy away from their brawling, vibrant heart. The harmony grew. It was picked up by deep space relays, then colonial listening posts. It was beautiful, a siren song of celestial logic. On the colony world of Xylos, a bustling trade hub known for its cacophonous markets and fiery political debates, the first reports were of a sudden, inexplicable peace. Riots quelled not by force, but by a collective change of heart. Bitter trade rivals were seen embracing in the streets. A day later, all outgoing communications from Xylos ceased, replaced by a single, repeating carrier wave that echoed the deep space harmony. There were no distress calls, no screams, just a profound and unnerving silence. It was from the bridge of Mnemosyne's small defense monitor, the Vigil, that they got their first look. A shape drifted into the system, vast and crystalline, like a cathedral carved from a single geode. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It had no visible engines, no weapon emplacements, no hard angles of military design. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, and as it drew closer, the harmony intensified, washing over the Vigil's crew. The captain, a hardened Rigelian veteran named Kaelin, ordered a standard challenge. Her voice, usually a staccato bark of command, came out as a soft, hesitant query. On the bridge, her first officer lowered the targeting computer screen, a look of sublime tranquility on his scaled face. "There's no need for that, Captain," he murmured. "Can't you feel it? The noise is gone." Kaelin felt it too, a gentle but insistent pressure against her will, a suggestion to lay down her burdens, her identity, her very name, and simply be. She fought it, her mind, trained for decades in the arts of war and resistance, recoiling from the placid void the harmony offered. With a final, desperate act of will, she severed the ship's primary comms link and sent a single, tight beam data burst to Mnemosyne before her own consciousness dissolved into the serene, silent ocean of the signal. The burst contained the ship's final sensor logs and a single, chilling word she had scrawled onto a datapad with a trembling claw: assimilation. The entity was called the Silenti. The name came from the scattered records of a long-dead race Eris found deep in the archives. A species that had encountered them millennia ago and left behind a few fragmented, terrified warnings. The Silenti did not conquer, they converted. They were a collective consciousness, ancient and vast. that saw the chaotic, screaming friction of individual thought as a cosmic disease. Their hymn, the harmonious signal, was their cure. It was a mimetic plague that targeted the very architecture of self-awareness, smoothing over the jagged edges of personality, erasing cultural memory, and subsuming the individual into their silent, placid whole. They arrived not as conquerors, but as shepherds, bringing what they considered the gift of peace to the noisy, frantic species they encountered. They would not kill you. They would unwrite you. The horror of it settled over Nemazini like a shroud. The coalition government, a fragile alliance of 100 different worlds, fell into predictable panic. Fleets were mobilized. Warships crewed by beings who valued their individuality above all else were sent to fight a song. They arrived with cannons blazing and shields flaring, but their weapons found no purchase on the crystalline choir of the Silenti, and one by one, their crews fell silent, their guns ceased firing, and their ships began to drift, becoming aimless, peaceful tombs for minds that no longer cared that they were lost. Nemazini was the ultimate prize. It was the galaxy's Library of Alexandria, a testament to the beautiful, messy, contradictory nature of individuality. It was a monument to noise, and the Silenti could not abide its existence. The choir that had silenced the vigil was now moving toward them, a slow, inevitable angel of death. On the planetoid, the first effects were felt. Staff members would pause mid-sentence, a look of confusion followed by a serene smile. Arguments in the mess hall faded into quiet consensus. Pella, Eris's closest colleague, a Lorn whose species communicated through complex, layered sense that conveyed emotional nuance far beyond human language, found her own olfactory palate simplifying, the scent of fear and inquiry fading into a single, placid note of acceptance. "It is soothing, Aris," she'd murmured, her scent glands emitting a fragrance of calm contentment that terrified him more than any scream could. "It wants us to let go of our pain, of our history." Eris felt it too, a gentle pull at the edges of his own frantic, worried thoughts. A voice that wasn't a voice whispered that his work was meaningless, that memory was a burden, that the struggles of the past were chains that could be unshackled. All he had to do was listen. All he had to do was stop fighting. He fled to the one place he knew the hymn's logic couldn't easily penetrate, the deepest, most secure vault in the archive. Section 0, the Pandora Archive. This was the place where humanity's uncurated data was stored. It was a raw, unfiltered feed of everything humanity had ever been. A digital ghost of their entire civilization, locked away because it was considered too dangerous, too volatile, to integrate with the main archive. Other species curated their histories, presenting their best selves to the galaxy. Humans, in a fit of what could only be described as self-flagellating honesty, had preserved everything. Inside the vault, the air hummed with the contained chaos of a billion lives. The hymn of the Silenti was a perfect crystalline chord, designed to resonate with and cancel out the organized patterns of sentient thought. But here, there was no pattern. Here, there was only noise. Eris stood before the central data core, a pulsating sphere of black glass, and felt the raw, untamed psychic energy of his species wash over him. He felt the righteous fury of a warrior charging into a hopeless battle, the paralyzing terror of a child lost in the dark, the ecstatic joy of a composer finishing a symphony, the bitter grief of a mother at her son's grave. He heard the cacophony of 1 billion arguments on their ancient internet, the whispered confessions of priests, the hateful shrieks of demagogues, the soaring declarations of poets, the illogical, passionate, contradictory madness of it all. The Silenti hymn was harmony. This was discord. The Silenti offered peace by erasing dissonance. Humanity, he realized, was pure, weaponized dissonance. An idea bloomed in his mind, monstrous and brilliant in its simplicity. A conventional army could not fight a song. A fleet could not bombard an idea. But you could, perhaps, fight a song with a scream. You could fight a signal of perfect harmony with a signal of pure weaponized chaos. He ran from the vault, the whispers of the hymn seeming to recoil from the psychic static he now carried with him. He burst onto the command deck, where the remaining senior staff stood like statues, their faces placid, their eyes distant as they watched the Silenti choir fill their view screen. "I have a solution," Eris gasped, his voice a harsh, jagged thing in the serene quiet of the room. "We can't outfight them. We can't outrun them. So we have to outthink them by using something they can't possibly comprehend." The station commander, a woman who only moments before had been suggesting they power down their systems and welcome their visitors, turned her head slowly, a flicker of her old self returning to her eyes. "What are you talking about, Doctor?" Eris pointed a shaking finger at the main transmitter controls. "The Silenti are logic. They are order. Their hymn is a mathematical formula for peace. We are going to broadcast an unsolvable equation. We are going to transmit the raw, unfiltered data stream from Section 0. We are going to show them the sound of humanity's soul. We will not send them a message of defiance. We will send them a virus made of memory, a plague of pure chaos. We will fight their hymn with our discord." The commander, Alara Vesh, was the first to move. The hymn's placid grip on her mind shattered not gently, but like a pane of ice dropped from a great height. She gasped, stumbling back from the console, her hands flying to her temples as a lifetime of command decisions, of grief for lost crews, of tactical fury and cold-blooded calculus flooded back into her consciousness all at once. It was an agony she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Around the bridge, others were experiencing the same violent reawakening. A communications officer vomited quietly into a waste receptacle. Pella, the lorn archivist, let out a multi-scented cry of terror and relief. A fragrance so complex and contradictory, it was like smelling a war and a birth simultaneously. Eris's solution was not an antidote. It was a counter-toxin, a dose of strychnine to fight the opium, and the system shock was brutal. But they were awake. They were themselves. And they were terrified. "What have you done?" Vesh demanded, her voice raw, her eyes fixed on Eris, who was frantically rerouting power, bypassing safety interlocks that screamed in protest with shrill, digital warnings. The main transmitter, a delicate instrument designed to share curated knowledge with fledgling civilizations, was groaning under the strain of a data load it was never meant to bear. "I've given us a voice," Aris shot back, not looking up from his work. "Get your people back to their stations. This is not over." The air itself seemed to vibrate with the broadcast, the discord. It wasn't audible, but it was palpable, a psychic static that felt like sandpaper on the soul. On the main view screen, the Silenti choir, the crystalline cathedral, began to react. Its soft, internal, opalescent light, which had pulsed with the steady Vedu serene rhythm of the hymn, began to flicker erratically. Hues of bruised violet and feverish red bled through its pristine white facets. The perfect, harmonious signal that had washed over their system didn't just stop, it fractured, stuttering like a broken recording, trying and failing to find its key. The choir was attempting to process the discord, to understand and assimilate the raw feed from Section 0. It was trying to find the logic in a billion years of human irrationality. It was trying to harmonize a scream. The broadcast was a torrent of pure yet undiluted humanity. It was the joy of the first lunar landing transmitted alongside the gibbering paranoia of a mad king. It was the complete works of Shakespeare interwoven with the hateful manifestos of forgotten genocidal warlords. It was the sound of a baby's laughter and the final, choking gasp of a plague victim. It contained every love letter, every declaration of war, every dirty joke, every scientific breakthrough, every racial slur, every prayer whispered in desperation, and every lie told for political gain. It was a signal composed of everything humanity was, good and ill, brilliant and savage, without filter or apology. It was the sound of a species perpetually at war with itself, and for the Silenti, a consciousness that had achieved perfect internal unity millennia ago. It was the conceptual equivalent of staring into the abyss. On a lower deck, in a small maintenance conduit where she'd been trying to hotwire a grounded short-range scout ship, Jax felt the shift. A pilot by trade and a rebel by nature, Jax had been grounded on Minimazani for flying a dangerously creative and flagrantly unsanctioned race through an asteroid field. She had felt the hymn's call as a creeping, cloying boredom, a tranquilizer for a soul that thrived on adrenaline. She was moments from succumbing, her hand hovering over a power conduit, the desire to simply rest overwhelming her, when the discord hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't pain. It was a jolt of pure energy, a shot of everything she was. She felt the thrill of 1,000 dogfights, the roaring crescendo of a forbidden rock concert from her youth on Neo-Detroit, the defiant anger of her last court-martial. The placid fog in her mind evaporated, replaced by a fierce, joyful clarity. "Now we're talking." She grinned and slammed the conduit into place. The scout ship, the stray dog, sputtered to life, its screens flickering with the raw energy of the Discord broadcast. On the bridge, they watched the choir struggle. Its crystalline form seemed to warp, its facets shifting as if in agony. It was trying to apply its logic, its cure, to the human signal, but it was like trying to build a perfect cage for water. For every pattern it identified, the Discord presented a million contradictions. It found the mathematical beauty of Bach, only to have it corrupted by the chaotic noise of a stock market crash. It tried to lock on to the serene philosophies of Zen masters and was immediately assaulted by the incoherent rage of a billion internet trolls. It was a feedback loop of cosmic insanity. The choir was not just a ship. It was a node of the Silenti consciousness, a mind as vast as a planet. And Aris had just subjected it to a full frontal psychic assault. "It's confused," Pella breathed, her scent a mixture of awe and horror. "I don't think it has a concept for this. For self-contradiction on this scale." And Commander Vesh, now fully in control, began snapping orders. "Damage report. Get shields to full. I want every functioning weapon system online and targeting that thing. Now, Jax, if you can hear me, get that rust bucket of yours ready to fly. The doctor just kicked the hive. I want a hornet of our own in the air." The victory, if it could be called that, was short-lived. The Silenti were ancient, not stupid. After several long but agonizing minutes, the choir ceased its attempt to process the discord. The flickering lights stabilized. The spasming facets locked back into place, and then the choir went silent. The hymn did not return. The fractured, stuttering signal vanished. An absolute, profound silence emanated from the crystalline entity, a silence that was far more menacing than the song it replaced. "What's it doing?" Aris asked, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He had expected it to retreat, to recoil from the psychic poison he had unleashed. He had not considered what would happen if it simply adapted. Then, the change began. The Silenti choir was no longer a cathedral. It was becoming a weapon. The thousand-faceted surface began to rearrange itself. Smaller crystals retracted, while larger ones shifted and grew, their edges sharpening, their surfaces aligning with geometric precision. They were forming a lens, a massive focusing array that spanned the entire length of the vessel. The soft internal light that had once been diffused throughout its structure was now being drawn inward, channeled and compressed into a single, horrifyingly bright point at the heart of the new array. It was gathering its energy, not to broadcast a song of conversion, but to fire a beam of pure annihilation. "Shields brace for impact," Vesh roared. "It's not trying to talk to us anymore." The shepherd had discovered that this particular sheep was rabid. It had dropped its gentle crook and was now preparing to cauterize the infection from the fabric of the universe. The discord was still screaming out from Mnemosyne's transmitter, a defiant howl of chaotic humanity, but it was no longer a weapon. It was a beacon, painting a perfect target on their home. On board the stray dog, Jack saw the change on her own screens. "Commander, I'm seeing a massive energy spike. Whatever that thing is, it's not singing anymore. It's charging." Eris watched the view screen, his face pale. He had won the battle of ideas, only to start a war of physics. He had shown the monster humanity's soul, and the monster had decided, with cold, silent finality, that it was a soul that needed to be extinguished. The point of light on the choir grew from a star to a sun, a blinding point of white-hot energy that seemed to burn the eyes even through the filtered view screen. They had fought a song with a scream, and in doing so, they had provoked the silence into an act of ultimate violence. Eris looked at the faces of the crew around him, awake, alive, and utterly doomed, and understood the terrible truth of his gamble. He hadn't saved them. He had only given them the clarity to watch themselves die. The beam that struck Mnemosyne was not a lance of light or a bolt of plasma. It was a focused ray of pure order. Where it touched the planetoid's powerful energy shields, there was no explosion, no violent discharge of energy. Instead, the shield simply ceased to be. The complex, interwoven fields of electromagnetic force that protected the archive were not broken. They were solved. The Silenti weapon didn't apply force. It applied logic, a perfect, irresistible equation that reduced the chaotic energy of the shield to its simplest, most inert state. The shield didn't fail. It was neatly and tidily erased from existence. A collective gasp echoed across the bridge. Alarms shrieked, a useless, panicked noise against the cold, calculated attack. Without the shield, the beam of order sliced into the rock and metal of the archive itself. It carved a silent, perfect line across the planetoid's surface, a surgical incision miles long. Anything caught in its path outlying data vaults, communication arrays, residential habs vanished. They didn't explode or melt. The very matter they were composed of was deconstructed, its atomic bonds unwritten, its existence filed away into nothingness. The sheer alien wrongness of the attack was more terrifying than any conventional bombardment. This wasn't war. This was curation. The Silenti were not destroying the archive. They were editing it. Evasive maneuvers. Vesh yelled. The command a useless reflex. "Jax, you're our only eyes out there. Give us a firing solution, anything." From the cockpit of the stray dog, Jax watched the silent, horrifying surgery unfold. Her tiny scout ship, agile and unpredictable, was the only thing moving in the space around Minimazani. A gnat buzzing around a god. The Discord broadcast and still spewing from the archive's main transmitter filled her cockpit with a psychic static that kept her mind sharp, a constant, chaotic reminder of what she was fighting for. Her targeting computer was useless. The Silenti choir gave off no heat signature, no energy readings that corresponded to any known drive or weapon system. It was a ghost on her sensors. "There's nothing to lock onto, Commander!" she yelled back, her hands flying across the controls as she dodged a secondary targeting beam that sought to solve her ship's existence. It's like trying to shoot a thought on the bridge. Eris was no longer a historian. He was a soldier in a war of concepts. "Don't target the ship," he said, his voice quiet but clear amidst the chaos. "Target the beam. It's a focused signal, just like the hymn. It's pure order." "We fought the hymn with chaos. We have to do it again." Vesh turned to him, her face grim. "With what, Doctor?" "The Discord is already broadcasting. It didn't stop this." "No," Eris agreed, his eyes glued to the tactical display, watching the beam's slow, inexorable progress. "The Discord is a broadcast. It's ambient. It's a scream into the void. This beam is a focused thought. We need a focused argument. We need to inject chaos directly into their logic." He pointed to the still glowing data core of Section 0 on a secondary schematic. "The Discord is the raw feed. But inside that archive, there are specific moments, singularities of human logic so potent, so paradoxical, they could destabilize any system built on pure reason. We can't fire a missile, but we can fire a memory." It was an insane idea, born of desperation, to weaponize a specific fragment of human history, to encode it into a tight beam transmission and fire it like a torpedo into the Silenti's weaponized logic. It was like trying to kill a computer program by forcing it to read a single, perfectly crafted line of bad poetry. Pella, the Lorn, was already at her console, her scent glands emitting a sharp, acrid odor of concentrated focus. "I can isolate the data strings, Doctor, but the transmitter can't handle a focused beam of that density. It will burn out in seconds." "We only need one shot," Vesh said, understanding dawning in her eyes. She turned to her comms officer. "Patch me through to the stray dog. Jax, I have a new flight plan for you. I hope you're feeling creative." Jax listened, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. The plan was impossible, suicidal, and the most beautifully human piece of insanity she had ever heard. "Fly into the beam. You guys are buying the drinks when this is over," she said, her voice crackling with static and adrenaline. She threw the stray dog into a wild, corkscrewing dive, pushing the small ship's inertial dampeners to their screaming limit. Her goal was not to dodge the Silenti's main weapon, but to get so close to its source, the focusing array on the choir, that she could become a living conduit. She was the needle, and Aris was about to thread it with the most poisonous memory he could find. Back on the bridge, Eris and Pella worked in a frantic duet. Eris plunged his mind back into the chaos of Section 0, not as a passive observer, but as a hunter. He needed a moment of pure, unadulterated human paradox. He sifted through millennia of data, past wars fought for peace, past religions that preached love through acts of hate, past technologies of creation used only for destruction. He needed the perfect weapon, the ultimate contradiction. And then he found it. A small, obscure file from Earth's 20th century. It was audio only. A recording from something they called the Trench of Whispers during a conflict named the First World War. It was the sound of thousands of soldiers from opposing armies who had spent months slaughtering each other with brutal, industrial efficiency, spontaneously laying down their arms on a religious holiday. It was the sound of them singing carols together in the frozen mud of no man's land, sharing rations, showing each other pictures of their families. The next day, on the orders of their distant commanders, they resumed killing one another. It was a moment of perfect, illogical compassion, followed by a moment of perfect, logical obedience to murder. It was hope and despair, love and hate, sanity and madness, all compressed into a single, incomprehensible event. It was a paradox that human historians had debated for centuries. To the purely logical mind of the Silenti, it would be a lethal logic bomb. "I have it," Eris whispered, his face ashen. Pella isolated the file, her tendrils flying across her console, wrapping the memory in a carrier wave, compressing it, sharpening it into a single, data-dense spike. "Ready for transmission. On your mark. Commander." Jax. Status. Vesh commanded. "Almost there." Jax's voice was strained, the G-forces threatening to crush her, dancing with the big ugly. "The beam is beautiful. Tell my ex I'm borrowing his ship for one last joyride." She brought the stray dog into a final, suicidal arc, flying directly into the corona of the focusing array, placing her ship between the Silenti and Mnemosyne. For a split second, her small vessel was bathed in the pure, silent energy of the weapon. "Now, Jax." "Now," Vesh screamed. Jax hit a single, glowing red button on her console. The stray dog's comms antenna, reinforced for this very purpose, opened a direct channel. "Uploading your poison pill. Doc hope it gives him indigestion." Vesh gave the final command. "Fire the memory." Pella sent the transmission. For a fraction of a second, the tiny stray dog became the focal point of two opposing universal forces. The beam of pure, relentless order from the Silenti choir passed through its hull, and into that beam, Mnemosyne fired a single, concentrated moment of perfect human chaos. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The choir didn't explode. It shattered. The moment the paradoxical memory of the Christmas truce hit its logic stream, a fissure of pure blackness split the crystalline entity from tip to tip. It was not a physical crack, but a conceptual one. The perfect, logical structure of its consciousness broke apart. The beam of order it was firing winked out of existence. The blinding light at its core imploded, not with a bang, but with a silent, final pop, like a soap bubble bursting. The entire 2-mile-long crystalline structure, a being of immense power and ancient intelligence, crumbled into a cloud of inert, glittering dust, its facets tumbling silently through the void, no longer a thinking being, but mere space debris. The silence that followed was different. It was not the menacing, watchful silence of the Silenti. It was the simple, empty silence of a battle won, of a threat ended. And in that silence, a single, tinny voice crackled over the bridge speakers. "Scratch one bogey. Anyone got a tow truck? The stray dog is officially out of gas." The aftermath was a graveyard of silent light. The remnants of the Silenti choir drifted in a slow, glittering cloud catching the light of the distant star like a shattered chandelier. There was no elation on the bridge of Minimazani, only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and the lingering psychic echo of the horrors they had witnessed. They had survived, but the cost was etched onto the surface of their home, a deep, dead scar where the beam of order had carved away history, homes, and lives. The Discord broadcast, its purpose served, was silenced. The sudden absence of its chaotic hum was as jarring as its arrival, leaving a ringing stillness in its wake. Into this quiet, Commander Vesh's voice was the first to return, stripped of its battlefield urgency, heavy with the weight of command. "Status report, all stations." The reports that trickled in were grim. Power was critical. Life support was failing in a dozen sectors. The structural integrity of the planetoid was compromised along the entire length of the Silenti's incision, and they were alone. The attack had severed their long-range communications, cutting them off from the nascent coalition that had proven so useless against the initial threat. They were an island of memory in a silent, indifferent sea. But the most chilling report came from Eris Thorn. He stood before the main sensor display, his face a mask of dawning horror, the cloud of crystalline dust. The remains of the choir was not dispersing as expected. Instead, it was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to coalesce. "Commander," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "it's not dead. We didn't kill it. We just broke it." On the view screen, the glittering motes of dust were drawing together, not reforming into their previous shape, but clumping into smaller, angrier forms. The perfect geometry of the choir was gone, replaced by jagged, asymmetrical shards of crystal, each one pulsing with a chaotic, furious internal light. They had shattered the unified consciousness, the serene, logical shepherd. What was emerging from the wreckage were its splintered, fractured components. They had taken a single, logical monster and turned it into a swarm of mindless, enraged predators. They had traded a god for a legion of demons. The first of the new entities, a shard the size of a fighter jet, suddenly flared to life. It didn't broadcast a hymn of peace or a beam of order. It projected a raw and focused wave of pure psychic pain. On the bridge, Drew's members cried out, clutching their heads as the signal bypassed the ship's hull and slammed directly into their minds. It was a projection of the choir's own death, the agony of its logical consciousness being torn apart by the paradox Eris had unleashed. It was rage, it was confusion, and it was hungry. The shard launched itself forward, not with the serene glide of its parent, but with a vicious, predatory burst of speed, straight for the crippled, drifting form of the stray dog. "Jax, get out of there!" Vesh yelled, but Jax was already fighting. Her ship was dead in the space, but she was firing her maneuvering thrusters in short, desperate bursts, trying to spin the ship to present a smaller target. The shard, however, didn't seem to care about her ship. It slammed into the stray dog's flank, but not with physical force. It phased partially through the hull, its crystalline structure vibrating at an impossible frequency. Inside the cockpit, Jax screamed as the entity's pain field washed over her, a direct assault on her sanity. "It's in my head," she gasped over the comm, her voice strained. "It's not trying to kill the ship. It's trying to eat my mind." It was a new form of assimilation. The original Silenti had overwritten consciousness with serene unity. These fractured remnants, which the crew began to call the Shrieks, consumed it, feeding on the chaotic energy of individual thought, drawn to the very thing their progenitor had sought to erase. They were psychic vampires, born from the corpse of a dead god. Panic gave way to a cold, hard resolve on Minamazani's bridge. "Get her back," Vesh ordered, her voice like iron. "Weapons, fire on that thing. I don't care if you can't get a lock. Fill that space with fire." The archive's few remaining point defense turrets roared to life, spitting lasers and kinetic rounds at the Shrike, attacking the stray dog. The projectiles passed through the entity as if it were a ghost, its phased state rendering physical weapons useless. But the energy from the lasers seemed to affect it, causing it to recoil, its psychic scream intensifying as it was driven back from Jax's ship. "Energy weapons," Vesh noted. "It doesn't like raw energy. Pella. Analysis. What is its weakness?" Pella, her senses reeling from the psychic assault, forced herself to focus on the data streaming from the sensors. "Its state is unstable," she projected, her scent a sharp mix of ozone and fear. "It's constantly shifting between a physical and non-physical state. That's why kinetics don't work. But the energy from the lasers forces it to become tangible to dissipate the heat. For a microsecond after being hit, it is a solid object." And it was a tiny window, a fractional moment of vulnerability, not enough for a weapon to lock on, but perhaps enough for something else. Eris, his mind racing, saw the connection. "The Discord," he said. "The original entity couldn't process it. These things are made of that chaos now. They're drawn to it. They feed on it. But what if we overload them?" He turned to Vesh. "We need to turn the Discord back on. Not as a broadcast, as a lure. And Jax. Jax is the bait." The plan was horrific. They would use the stray dog's comms array, repaired by Jax with little more than willpower and spare parts, to project a tightly focused beam of the most chaotic data from Section 0 directly at her own ship. She would become the loudest, most tempting psychic meal in the system, drawing the shrieks to her. Then, once they were swarming her, Namazani would unleash its ultimate, last-ditch weapon, a system designed not for war, but for archival preservation, the stasis field. It was a device meant to freeze a small section of the archive in time to protect it from catastrophic data decay. It had never been used on this scale, and firing it would drain the planetoid's last reserves of power, leaving them dark and defenseless. But if they could catch the entire swarm within its bubble, they could freeze them, trapping them in a single moment for eternity. The message was relayed to Jax, in the battered cockpit of the stray dog, bleeding from her nose and fighting to stay conscious against the lingering psychic echoes. She didn't hesitate. "Light me up," she said, her voice a ragged whisper. "Let's see how many of these bastards I can take with me." The focus beam of the Discord shot from Namazani and struck the stray dog. To the gathering swarm of shrieks, it was like a lighthouse igniting in a sea of darkness. The chaotic energy, the pure, undiluted essence of human thought, was an irresistible feast. From the debris field, dozens, then hundreds of crystalline shards flared to life and shot towards the scout ship, their psychic screams merging into a single, horrifying chorus of agony and hunger. Jax watched them come, a swarm of glittering, angry ghosts descending on her. "They're taking the bait," she reported, her voice unnervingly calm. "They're beautiful, in a really screwed-up way." On Minamazani, Vesh stood with her hand over the activation key for the stasis field. Her knuckles were white. "Eris, are you sure about this? The field will envelop her ship." "She knows the risks," Eris replied, his face grim. He was sentencing the woman who had saved them to an eternity frozen in time, a living statue in a monument to their desperation. It was a choice that would haunt him forever. The shrieks swarmed the stray dog, phasing through its hull, their collective psychic scream reaching a deafening crescendo. Jax let out a final, defiant cry that was cut short. Vesh closed her eyes and slammed her hand down on the key. Activate! A sphere of pale blue light erupted from Minimus, expanding outward at impossible speed. It was utterly silent. It passed through the attacking shrieks and the stray dog in an instant. And then, everything stopped. The scene outside the view screen became a perfect, frozen tableau. The swarm of shrieks caught in the act of feeding. The stray dog, haloed by their ghostly forms. A single laser bolt from a defense turret, frozen halfway to its target. Time, within that sphere, had ceased to exist. They had won. They were alive. And they were adrift, powerless, with a monument to their own impossible, monstrous victory hanging in the void before them, a frozen scream in a silent universe. The silence that followed was not one of peace, but of vacancy. Minimazini, once a humming jewel box of galactic memory, was now a tomb adrift in a sea of its own making. Onde. Power, a resource once as abundant as the data it sustained, was now a flickering candle in a hurricane, rationed with a miser's desperation. The main lights were extinguished, leaving the corridors draped in the emergency glow of pale red strips. Long hallways of perpetual, blood-hued twilight. Crew members moved like ghosts through these crimson passages, their voices hushed, their steps slow, the psychic echoes of the battle having scoured away the easy camaraderie that once filled the mess halls. They were survivors, but they did not feel like victors. Their gazes were constantly drawn to the view screens, to the impossible object that now dominated their sky, the stasis field. A perfect sphere of pale blue light. It hung in the void like a captured moon, a silent, beautiful, and utterly horrifying monument to their survival. Within its timeless prison, the scene was frozen in an eternal, screaming crescendo. Say so. The ghostly, crystalline forms of the shrieks, mouths agape in psychic agony, swarmed the battered hull of the stray dog, and in the cockpit, a figure, barely visible, was immortalized at the apex of her defiance. Jax, the pilot, the rebel, the sacrifice, was now a statue in a museum of despair. No one felt the weight, say, of this monument more than Dr. Eris Thorne. The quiet archivist had become the architect of a new and terrible art form. He spent his cycles before the main view screen on the darkened bridge, a lone acolyte at a chilling altar. He had forsaken sleep, his body fueled by stimulants and a gnawing, restless guilt that was a far more potent energy source than the archive's failing reactors. He ran endless, recursive simulations, not to find a way to reverse the stasis he knew that was impossible, but to dissect the moment of its creation, to find a flaw, an alternative, a less costly variable in the equation of their salvation. He would isolate the data fragment of Jax's final, defiant cry, a soundless spike on a waveform, and play it back in his mind 1,000 times. Had she felt fear? Had she known the absolute finality of what was coming? He had unleashed the chaos of the human soul to fight a monster, and in the end, had he not become one himself, sacrificing the most vibrant soul among them to build a cage? His work had once been the curation of endings, the careful preservation of dead species. Now, he was the curator of a single, unending moment, and it was eating him alive. Pella, his lorn colleague, would sometimes approach him, her scent a complex, worried tapestry of empathy and ozone. She would try to draw him away, to speak of repairs, of the future, but his focus was absolute. He was trapped in that blue sphere just as surely as Jax was. It was on the 17th cycle of this bleak vigil that reality itself seemed to yawn. There was no flash, no thunderous arrival. Against the stark canvas of space, a section of the starfield simply was all folded. It was not a ship moving through space, but space itself reconfiguring, pleating into a new and elegant form. A vessel coalesced from the vacuum, long and impossibly slender, fashioned from a material that did not reflect light but seemed to absorb it, leaving a sliver of perfect blackness against the cosmos. Its hull was traced with filaments that pulsed with a soft, silver light, like the neural pathways of a sleeping leviathan. It was a thing of profound, silent grace, and its appearance triggered not the shrieking alarms of war, but the quiet, questioning chirps of sensors encountering something so far outside their parameters they could only register it as a paradox. On the bridge, Commander Vesh rose from her chair, the long days of rationing and repair having etched new lines of exhaustion onto her face. But her spine was as straight as ever. "On screen," she commanded, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Identify yourself." The command was a formality, an old habit from a universe that now seemed a distant memory. There was no reply. The ship did not scan them. It did not power weapons. It simply hung there, a patient, knowing presence. Then, a new sensation bloomed in their minds. It was not a voice, not a psychic blow. It was a cascade of pure understanding, a tapestry of complex concepts woven directly into the fabric of their consciousness, bypassing the clumsy architecture of language entirely. It was serene, dispassionate, and as clear as starlight. "We heard your scream." The thought resonated, carrying with it a sense of immense, ancient time. The universe has been quiet for a very long time. You have made a new sound, without passing through the hull, without so much as shimmering the air. A form coalesced in the center of the bridge. It was a humanoid shape woven from threads of the same silver light as the ship's filaments, a being of pure, structured energy. It had no face, yet they felt its gaze upon them all. They were, it explained, the Weavers. The term was their own, a simple descriptor for a function they had served since the first galaxies had cooled. They were not an empire, not a race. They were custodians, gardeners, in a cosmic expanse where the weeds were entire civilizations. The Silenti, the Weavers' thoughts explained, were not a malevolent force. They were a function of reality itself, a cosmic immune response. When a species' chaotic potential, their capacity for unpredictable, paradoxical, and reality-straining thought reached a certain threshold, they risked destabilizing the fundamental constants of their local space-time. The Silenti would then emerge, not to conquer, but to pacify, to apply a perfect, logical harmony that would soothe the chaotic species into a placid, harmless state of unity. They were the great filter, made manifest as a song. The Weavers showed them images, not on a screen, but directly in their minds, a race of silicon beings who had learned to manipulate probability, their civilization dissolving into serene, static crystals as the hymn washed over them, a species of gaseous philosophers who had contemplated themselves into a state of pure energy, only to be gently gathered and quieted by a passing choir. The Silenti were not evil. They were a reset button. And you, the Weaver's thoughts continued, a new feeling entering the transmission, something akin to academic fascination. You broke the failsafe with a weapon forged from sentimental illogic. You did not counter their logic. You poisoned it with a paradox it could not compute. Such a thing was considered a theoretical impossibility. You are an anomaly the system was not designed to contain. The weight of this revelation settled upon the bridge crew. They were not heroes who had defeated a tyrant. They were a virus that had just killed the cure. The Weaver presented them with a choice, laid out not as a threat, but as a dispassionate observation of the new reality they had created. The first option was containment. The Weavers could and would erect a conceptual barrier around humanity's local star systems. It would be impenetrable. Within it, humanity could live out its chaotic, brilliant, self-destructive history. They would be safe from the universe. The universe would be safe from them. They would become a permanent, preserved exhibit in the Weaver's vast, silent museum. You would be remembered, the Weaver's thoughts promised, but you would not matter. The second option was transformation. Your discord is a raw power, the Weaver explained, the mental tapestry showing them images of their chaotic broadcast ripping through the fabric of conventional physics. It is a weapon of instinct, but it could be a tool of creation. It is the sound of a new physics. We can teach you how to shape it, how to focus your chaos, how to turn your scream into a song. But if you choose this path, you will never be able to go back. When other species look upon you, they will no longer see noisy, ambitious primates. They will see the anomaly that broke the silence. You will be myth, you will be feared, and you will be utterly alone, for there will be nothing else like you. The choice, unspoken, fell to Eris. Commander Vesh looked at him, her face a grim mask. Her duty was to the survival of her crew, her species. Containment was the logical, military choice. It was survival. But she remained silent, deferring to the man who had started this war of concepts. Eris felt the gaze of the entire bridge upon him, but he only saw two things: the shimmering, transcendent form of the Weaver, offering them a quiet, gilded cage, and the cold blue sphere on the view screen, holding the woman who had died, refusing to be caged. He thought of humanity's entire, bloody, beautiful history. They had always chosen the dangerous freedom over the safe prison. To accept containment would be the ultimate betrayal of Jax, of every human who had ever raged against the dying of the light. "No," Eris said, his voice quiet but resonant in the silent room. "We will not be an exhibit." He walked to the view screen, the Weaver's light casting his long shadow before him. He placed his hand on the cold plasteel, his eyes fixed on the frozen tableau within the sphere. "You say we can shape the discord. You are right, but we will not use the raw, hateful noise from our past. We will not build our future on a foundation of rage and fear." And he turned, his gaze meeting the faceless form of the Weaver. "We will use that," he said, pointing to the stasis field. "That is not a monument to our victory. It is the seed of our new voice. It contains the paradox that broke your failsafe. It holds the desperation, the suicidal courage, the tactical brilliance, and the willing sacrifice of our very best. We will not broadcast our old chaos. We will broadcast her story. Let that be our new song. A ripple of something new, something akin to surprise, emanated from the Weaver. It was an elegant, poetic, and utterly unexpected solution. The Weavers, with their dispassionate curiosity, agreed. They did not give commands. They offered understanding. The intricate principles of shaping a conceptual broadcast were woven into the minds of Pella and the engineering team. The last dregs of Mnemosyne's power were rerouted, not to weapons or life support, but to a new kind of transmitter. an array that would use the stasis field itself as a resonating chamber. Eris stood at the central console, no longer an archivist of the past, but the conductor of the future. Vesh stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, a silent, unshakable partnership. "Do it, Doctor," she said, with a final, steadying breath. Eris gave the command. The pale blue sphere of the stasis field began to glow, its light shifting from a serene azure to a brilliant, burning silver. It pulsed once, twice, and then, with a final, silent flash that filled the bridge with light, it dissolved. But the tableaus it contained did not vanish. Jax, the stray dog, the swarming shrieks, they did not explode or fade. They unraveled, their forms dissolving into a wave of pure, structured information, a complex symphonic signal that erupted outward from Nemazini. It was no longer a scream. It was a story. It carried the chilling harmony of the Silenti, the ravenous agony of the shrieks, and the defiant, paradoxical courage of a single human pilot who chose to fly into the fire. It was a song of what it meant to fight for the right to be messy, to be contradictory, to be gloriously, tragically alive. The signal washed over the crippled archive, and for the first time since the choir's arrival, the crew felt not terror or grief, but a profound and sorrowful hope. The song spread, moving at the speed of thought, carrying the legend of the pilot who broke the silence out into the vast, waiting darkness. Humanity had made its first mark on the true cosmic stage. They were no longer a footnote. They were the first note of a new and terrible music.